So this particular problem right here is called a quartic. And the reason it's called a quartic is it's raised to the fourth power. That is not a definition that you need to know by any stretch of the imagination. You don't need to know that this is a quartic. What you do need to know is that it's different than x squared. Okay, it's not a quadratic. But we are still going to solve this the same way that we solve a quadratic. So instead of having x and x here, what we're going to have is x squared and x squared. Now we can still solve this by using our sum and our product. We're still going to look at this that way. So my product is 96, or negative 96, and my sum is negative 4. Now, you might not immediately recognize the two numbers that multiply together that give me 96. Okay, but remember, I want you to be familiar with numbers up to 12 times 12. That is something that I want you to be familiar with. Negative 96 is actually divisible by 8. Okay, negative 96 is divisible by 8. Okay, so it's 8 times 12. And if you're not sure about that, then you do the multiplication. 8 times 12 is 16. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 1 is 96. Okay? Another way that you can do that is you can do a factor tree to kind of start breaking it down to see what multiples and what you can do for 96. So, there we go. So we've got a product of negative 96 and a sum of negative 4. Now our numbers, we just decided, are 8 and 12. 8 and 12. But one of them's negative and one of them's positive. I've got a negative sum and a negative product. So one of my numbers is negative and one of my numbers is positive. Which one's negative? Which one's positive? 12 is negative. Good. And 8 is positive. So we did that the same way that we would factor x squared minus 4x minus 96. The only difference is that instead of having x right here, we have x squared times x squared so that we can get the x to the fourth. Okay? So be aware of that. Now, I can't factor this anymore. If this, because of the minus, if that 12 was a perfect square, then we could do the perfect square. We could do the difference of perfect squares, and we could have x plus 2 and x minus 2. But it's not. 12 is not a perfect square. So the way that we continue to solve this is we use our properties that we've learned about the square root. And I'm going to say x squared plus 8 equals 0. And I'm going to say x squared minus 12 equals 0. Okay? What do I do next for each one of these?
You would isolate the x squared.
You would isolate the x squared. That's exactly right. We would isolate the x squared. So I'm going to subtract 8 here. So I have x squared equals negative 8. Okay, I've got a square on the left side. So my next step is to take the square root of both sides. Okay, when I take the square root of both sides, what do I have to put on my right-hand side? Plus or minus. Good. Plus or minus. So then I'm left with x equals plus or minus negative 8. Okay, and we learned how to deal with negative 8 on Wednesday. Okay, so we're going to break this down further. We're going to have x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 1. What's the square root of negative 1? I. Good. Times 4 times 2. Why did I break 8 down to 4 times 2? Because 4 is perfect. Good. So then I'm going to have x equals plus or minus I times 2, and then the other 2 is going to stay inside the square root. And so I want you to know, whoops. Okay, so what's important to know So this is my final answer. X equals plus or minus 2I on the square root of 2. That's part of my final answer. Do you see how I have this plus or minus I times 2 times the square root of 2 right here? I want you to know that that's mathematically correct and it's mathematically simplified. So if you put this as your answer right here, you're still going to get it right. This is traditionally how it's written. Plus or minus 2I on the square root of 2. So I want you to know the difference between those two. The top one is simplified and correct. The bottom one is traditionally how you see it written. It's kind of like, we don't usually see x2 or x times 2 written. What do we usually see? 2x, okay? So it's the same kind of idea there. So x equals plus or minus 2I on the square root of 2 deals with the x squared plus 8. Okay? Now I need to go back and deal with the x squared minus 12. So I've got x squared equals 12. I added 12 to both sides. I'm going to take the square root of both sides, and when I take the square root of both sides, what do I have to remember on the right-hand side? Plus or minus. So I have x squared, I don't have x squared. I have x equals plus or minus the square root. Now I'm going to break 12 down into 3 times 4. Why am I breaking it down to 3 times 4 and not 6 times 2? 4 is perfect. Good. Okay. So these are my 2, and actually it's 4 answers. But those are my solutions right there. Plus or minus 2 on the square root of 3 and plus or minus 2I on the square root of 2. Okay? Can I go to the next screen? I still see a couple people writing. Am I good? I can go ahead? Okay. Okay. Now, these are rational equations, and we've done these before. We did these in chapter 4. Okay? These are rational equations. Now, what we do when we solve a rational equation, is we have to multiply everything by the LCD. So we've got to determine what is the LCD here. So the first thing that I do is I look at this x minus 1, okay, and I write that down, x minus 1. Okay, now I look at this x and I ask myself, is x already represented in the x minus 1? And it isn't, okay? It would have to be x minus 1 times x. Remember, x minus 1 is a factor. It is a it stays together. X minus 1 stays together. So I do have to write down a separate x. So I've got x minus 1 times x. And then I have to make sure the 2 is represented. So then I say times 2. So my LCD is x minus 1 times x times 2. And so I am going to multiply everything times this LCD. Okay? That's what I'm multiplying everything by. So I'm going to write it all out so that we can see it super clearly. So I've got x minus 1 times x times 2 over 1. And I am multiplying that times my original problem. So my first term is 3 over x minus 1. Okay? Now, do you see that minus in front of that 2? Do you see the minus? Where should I move that so I don't lose my minus? To the 2. So I'm going to make this plus negative 2. Okay? So then I am going to multiply x minus 1 times x times 2 over 1. I'm going to multiply that times negative 2 over x. Okay, and then I've got to do that one more time. So I am multiplying my LCD by every single term in my problem. Okay? Now, I'm going to eliminate my denominators. And that is by design. That's what we want to happen. And we can do that because of the equal sign. That's why we can eliminate it. So I've got x minus 1 and x minus 1. So then I'm left with 3 times 2 times x. Okay? So I have my 3 here, my x here, and my 2. Okay? Then, on my next one, I am eliminating x and my x. So now, I've got x minus 1 times 2 times negative 2. Okay? Then, for my last one, I can eliminate the 2. So for that, I'm left with 5, x minus 1, and x. Okay? Now, this is a little bit messy, but we now have an equation that we can solve. We've got some work to do on it, but we know how to solve this. Okay? So I'm going to simplify a little further so that we can kind of keep it all together. 3 times 2 is 6, times x is 6x. Okay? Now here, what is 2 times negative 2? Negative 4. So I'm actually going to write that down first because that's what I've got to distribute to my x minus 1. Okay? Now, I've also got a 5 right here and an x right here. I'm going to write that down first because that's what I have to distribute to my x minus 1. Okay? Now, another line of simplifying. So I've got 6x minus 4x plus 1. Or I'm sorry, plus 4. Minus 4x, because we're distributing here, negative 4x times x and negative 4x times negative 1. Then I've got 5x squared minus 5x. And hopefully we're recognizing that we're moving towards a quadratic. And anytime I'm dealing with a quadratic, what do I have to set that quadratic equal to? So I am going to actually move everything to the right. I do have one more thing I can simplify though. Do you see the 6x and then minus 4x? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to say 6x minus 4x is 2x plus 4 equals 5x squared minus 5x. So I am going to move the 2x over. So I'm subtracting 2x from both sides. And I am subtracting 4 from both sides. So I have 0 equals 5x squared minus 7x minus 4. Okay? Can I erase everything except the bottom thing? Okay. So this takes up a lot of room. So that's why I'm going to the second. Okay. So what we have is this has now gone to a quadratic that we know how to simplify. So I have 0 equals 5x squared minus 7x minus 4. Now, you are going to find that you can't factor that. 5 times negative 4 is negative 20. And the sum is negative 7. It can't be factored. So we are going to have to use completing the square or the quadratic formula. Now, this has an a value that's not 1. What's the a value here? 5. And it's got a b value that's not even. So in general, what would I recommend doing with this one? Quadratic. Okay, the quadratic formula. You don't have to. You can do completing the square. But in general, when a is not 1 and b is not even, or either of those, I recommend going to the quadratic. And the quadratic is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Now, our a value here is what? Our b value is, and our c value is negative 4. Okay? So, I am going to give you 3 minutes to do the quadratic formula on that. 3 minutes to do the quadratic formula on that. Okay, are we ready? So I am going to do the quadratic formula part in purple, and then I'm going to do my numbers that we're putting in red, just so you can see exactly what's happening here. Now, we have a negative b in this situation, a negative b. And sometimes when we have a negative b, students make mistakes with that negative b. Okay, so let's watch that closely. So I've got negative b, and our b is negative. So I have negative 7. What's going to happen to that?
Positive.
It's going to be positive. Good. And that's one of the places that students make mistakes. Then I've got plus or minus the square root of b squared. And again, b is negative. And what is a negative number squared? A positive. That's the second place that students make mistakes. Okay? They keep b squared negative, even though a negative times a negative is a positive. Okay? Then I've got minus 4 times a times c. Now my c value here is also negative. So I am going to put that in parentheses just so we keep that clear. Okay? Just so we keep that negative clear. And it is negative 4. Okay, so minus 4ac. Okay, then all of that is over 2 times, what's my a value? 5. Okay, so now we're going to kind of break it or simplify. Negative 7 is positive 7 plus or minus the square root. Negative 7 squared is 49. Negative 7 squared is 49. Okay? Positive 49. Negative 4 times positive 5 is negative 80. I'm sorry, it's negative 20. Negative 20 times negative 4 is positive what? 80. So negative 4 times positive 5 times negative 4 is 80. And then in the bottom, I have 10. Once I simplify 49 and 80, do I get 129? I do. Okay. I cannot simplify 129 anymore. There's no perfect square into 129. So this is your final answer right here. Okay? That's my final answer. Yes?
Okay, so you know how it says 49 plus 80?
Yes.
So how did you end up changing it to like for it to be able to add?
Okay, so why was it add and not subtract? That's a good question. Okay, so right here, I've got negative 4. You can think of that as plus negative 4. So minus 4 and plus negative 4 are the same thing. So this is a negative times a positive. So this number right here gives me negative. Then I take negative 20, multiply it times negative 4. That makes it positive because I've got a negative right there. It's a good question. Good question. Okay? Now, I want to do another one like this. And then I want to do a couple problems from the quiz. Okay, so I have 5 over n minus 3 minus 3 over n plus 3 equals 1. Okay, the first thing that I'm going to do to make this clear and try to prevent a mistake is I'm going to do plus negative 3. I'm going to move that negative to my numerator. Okay, that is a good thing to do, is go ahead and move that negative to the numerator. Now I'm going to multiply everything by my LCD. I'm going to multiply everything by my LCD. And my LCD is n minus 3 times n plus 3. N minus 3 times n plus 3. Okay, so I've got n minus 3 times n plus 3. I am multiplying everything times that. Okay, so that's over 1. So multiplying that times 5 over n minus 3. N minus 3 times n plus 3. Then I've got my negative 3 right here. Negative 3 over n plus 3. N minus 3 times n plus 3. I apologize that n plus 3 is running off the screen. So, n minus 3, that cancels. I'm left with 5 times n plus 3. Okay, n plus 3 cancel, so I'm left with negative 3 times n minus 3. And then remember, this is n minus 3 times n plus 3. I just kind of, I ran out of room. So I have 1 times n minus 3 times n plus 3. And that right there is the n plus 3. Okay? Now we have an equation that we can solve. So I'm going to do 5 times n plus 15, negative 3n plus 9. And then I've got to FOIL this over here. Now, n minus 3 times n plus 3 is a difference of perfect squares. So I have n squared minus 9. Okay, and that's n minus 3 times n plus 3. I FOILed that. That's a difference of perfect squares. Okay, so over here on the left, I have 5n and negative 3n. That gives me 2n. What is 15 and 9? What's 15 and 9?
24.
It is. Good. Okay. So I've got a quadratic. So I need to move my 2n and my 24 to the left. Okay, so I have 0 equals n squared minus 2n minus what? Is that 33? Okay, do I know how to solve a quadratic? Okay, so I need to erase. Is it okay if, are you guys, yes ma'am?
At the very end, you canceled n plus 3, right? The one that was running off the edge.
Yes, it was n plus 3. Yes,
You
ma'am.
canceled it.
I didn't because I was multiplying it by positive 1 right here. So that's what we got right here. Okay, so up here it's 1 times n minus 3 and n plus 3. And so then I rewrote that right here. I canceled it. The one that got canceled is here. N plus 3 and n plus 3 with the negative 3. Okay, so this negative 3 and this n minus 3, that's right here. Good? Okay? Okay, can I erase? Okay, so this one cannot be factored. So I have, and I'm going to rewrite it as n squared minus 2n minus 33 equals 0. Okay? This one cannot be factored. There is no number that you multiply with another number and get a product of negative 33 and add those two numbers and get negative 2. There's no number. Okay? So what we're going to do, I'm going to do completing the square with this one. And remember, on your final exam, you have one that says solve by completing the square. So be sure that you're comfortable with this. So my first step is to move that negative 33 over. So I'm going to have n squared minus 2n equals 33. Okay? Then I've got negative 2, so I take half of negative 2. What's half of negative 2? And then I square it. 1. So I'm going to add positive 1 to both sides. Okay? So I have n squared minus 2n plus 1 equals 34. Okay? This factors to n minus 1 times n minus 1. We rewrite that as n minus 1 squared. We did that by design. Okay? Now, I take the square root of both sides. When I take the square root of the right side, what do I have to include? Good. Okay, and so then I have n minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 34. 34 can only be multiplied by 2 and 17. Okay, so there's nothing perfect in 34, so we're just going to leave it. I add 1 to each side, and I am done. This is a great one to do completing the square because A is positive, or A is 1, and B is even. Okay, so it makes a nice, neat, perfect square. If you did the quadratic formula, you would still get the same answer, but you'd have to simplify some.
Is the quadratic formula going to give us?
Yes, I do. It'll probably be on the board, but yeah, you'll get it. Okay, yes ma'am.
What are the numbers?
Oh, these numbers right here were I rewrote that. That was when we had that whole other page and we had gotten to that point and I just needed to rewrite it. Sorry to confuse you on that. Okay, I've got 7 minutes left. There are 2 problems from the quiz that I want to do. Now, you don't have your quiz back yet because I haven't finished grading it. You'll get that on Monday. But number 5 on the quiz was the linear word problem. And number 10 on the quiz was the square root thing, where you had to solve an equation with a square root. I want to do both of those. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to do number 10 from the quiz. Then when my office hours start, I'm going to record the word problem from number 5. So I would encourage you to take the time this weekend, because I don't want to wait until Monday. I would encourage you to take the time this weekend to look at that video of me solving the linear word problem, okay? I would take the time to do that. Just because you're going to see that problem again, there's a problem in the final that's a linear word problem. So I want you to be comfortable with that. I just don't think I have enough time to do both. So this is number 10 on your quiz, okay? And your quiz is an excellent thing to look at because your test is going to be the quiz plus stuff from chapter 6. That's what it's going to be. So here we go. I've got x equals the square root of x plus 13 plus 7. Now, a lot of people didn't deal with that plus 7. A lot of people are like, oh, I'm supposed to square both sides, and they just squared both sides. You cannot square both sides until that 7 is on the other side. Do you see how this 7 is not inside the square root? So you've got to move it away from it before we square. So I'm subtracting 7 from both sides. So I get x minus 7 equals the square root of x plus 13. Now that is isolated, now that I've got this part by itself, I can square both sides. Okay? So I have x plus 13 on one side. I've got to FOIL x minus 7 times x minus 7. Okay? I've got to do that. X times x is x squared. X times negative 7 is negative 7x. Negative 7 times x is negative 7x. Negative 7 times negative 7 is positive 49. So I have x squared minus 14x plus 49. Okay? Now, now I'm going to subtract x from both sides, and I'm going to subtract 13 from both sides, because I've got to set it equal to 0. X squared minus 15x plus 39. Nope, not 39. 30 what?
36.
Thank you. 36. Okay, and this factors. It does factor. 2 numbers multiplied together give me 36. Added together give me negative 15. Negative 12 and negative 3. Okay, so then I have x minus 12 equals 0. X minus 3 equals 0. Okay, so x is 12 and x is 3. Now, we can have an extraneous solution, so we must check. We have to check to make sure I don't have an extraneous solution. So I'm going to check the number 12 first, and then I'm going to check the number 3. Okay, so I've got 12 equals the square root of 12 plus 13, and the plus 7 is outside the square root. Okay, so make sure you realize that that plus 7 is not inside the square root. So I have 12 equals the square root of 25 plus 7. Square root of 25 is 5. 12 equals 5 plus 7. Does it work? Yes, so 12 is a solution. When I plug 3 in, I have 3 equals the square root of 3 plus 13 plus 7. 3 plus 13 is 16, so I have the square root of 16. Square root of 16 is 4. Does that work? No. So I have got to mark that out. I have to indicate that that doesn't work, and that's called an extraneous solution. Okay? What do you need to look at and keep looking at over the next couple of days? The word problems. Okay? What has all your information? Homework solutions, Canvas. So keep looking at Canvas. Okay? Before I leave today, you'll have a video on the word problem from your quiz. You'll have a second practice test before I leave today. And then this weekend, I'll work on solutions to the practice test. Okay? Have a good weekend.